Hi all, my name is Rob. I am here in my basement lair in front of my gaming library. And I thought that something we could do that would be a bit of fun is I could go over some of my collection and kind of tell you why I collected some things or the history behind some of the things in my collection. I know that we as gamers can frequently be, proud of having a nice collection, and I've seen plenty of people put up their shelfies, showing off their most collectible or rare items, or just showing how many gaming books they have. Now, I have a decent amount of books, that's true, and for the most part, it's mostly a working library. These are books that I use or I intend to use or have used in the past. Books, adventures, all sorts of materials, as you'll see. I'm not going to give you an overall view of the entire thing. I thought I would focus on a shelf at a time and show you the whys and wherefores of what I collect. I think that knowing the history and knowing the content of a person's gaming library tells you a lot about the person who's collecting them, what they like, what style of game they espouse, and things of that nature. And I thought that, we're all friends here. You might be interested in what I have. I have showed my library in the past, but often without context or explanation for any of it, just, showing you that I have a lot of books. And while I do have a certain amount of pride in my collection, a lot of it boils down to my books are mostly useful. I don't gather books just because it's the hot new thing and they sit on my shelf. I genuinely hope that almost everything on my shelves will be something that I either have used or intend to use in the future, or I'm using now, although I usually have different arrangements for that. So, without further ado, I'd like to show you, take a few steps inside the vault and show you some of the books that I have, and I'll explain why, like a museum tour guide or something. So one thing you'll notice about my collection is I have a lot of knickknacks and decorations and things. And mostly that's just to improve appeal. There's not a great deal of personal attachment I have to a lot of these collectibles. Some of them are, they have a story behind them, but unless it's really something gripping, I'm really not going to talk about it. For example, you probably don't care about my love of wolves and nature scenes, that has something to do with a couple of my collections. The rubber rat that I've used as a familiar in the past, and every once in a while will turn up as a prop for something that I'm doing, but got him originally as a familiar for a wizard that I was playing and wanted him on the table. Mostly to remind me that I have a familiar. I tend to forget about them quite frequently. You'll see a lot of skull decorations. I like skulls. I think they set a good mood. This hourglass that I have up here was something that taught me a useful lesson. Way back in the day, my very first 5th edition game that I ever ran, I foolishly had a bunch of strangers in a public con game take pre-generated characters, but my hot idea was that instead of tracking experience by monsters that were overcome or challenges, I would have an hourglass and I would turn it over, and every time the sands run out, the group would get to level up. Problem, only one book. And I let everybody level up organically, which meant rolling for hit points, and that was a mess. I'll never do that again. But it's useful as an object lesson for me. Trying new things is fine, but I didn't think that through as well as I should have. But yeah, other than that, my chainmail coif, one of my favorite pieces of costuming, got that at a really good deal because they didn't have any more of the set, and it fit me perfectly. And the guy talked me up so much that I got it at a great price, and I love having it. I love having chainmail. It's awesome. I'd have a full suit if I could, but it either takes too much time to make for yourself, or they're more expensive than I can afford at the moment. So we get down into the first shelf, which is all that I will be covering today. Later on we will cover the others if people like this video, and hopefully they do. Also, I will get more into detail on some of these things if anybody is curious about something that they see or I cover, but not into the detail that you're interested in. So, most of what this is going to be my Dungeons & Dragons collection on up through 3rd edition. There's a couple of other things that kind of got tossed in here, which I'll I'll go over really quickly. Again, many of the decorations from the Schleich brand of mounted knights to statuary that I've collected. I have a lot of fun decorations. I like this pewter and crystal figure. It's always been one of my favorites. My wife got that for me, and she got me most of the figurines. We like to get each other little things like this. And this Hydra is an incense burner that doesn't work because it doesn't get enough airflow to let incense out and through, but I like collecting it. Hydras are fun. Also, I do love these I don't remember what they're called, but these crystal 3D puzzles. They're cool. I like them. Good mental exercise putting together something that's 3D more so than just a standard, jigsaw puzzle, in my opinion. So, outside of the random decorations and odd Insecticon Transformers, because I'm a geek from the 80s and I loved my Transformers when I was a kid, so now that they're remaking them, if I had the money, I would get them all. It rips my heart out every time they reproduce one from the 80s that I really loved and really wanted, and now that I'm an adult, I can't afford them. Ugh. At any rate. So, my D&D collection goes back, but before we get there, a couple things on top. My current adventure is set in Greyhawk, so I pulled out all of my Greyhawk Adventures books. These were from the box set, even though I don't have the box for them anymore. The Folk Feuds and Factions. I have 2 copies of that for some reason. I think I picked one up at Half Price Bookstore and I just saw that book by itself, thought I needed it, but I didn't. And then this is Greyhawk Gem of the Finesse. These are some of the finest city book source books that you can get. They detail the city of Greyhawk itself, set things into motion so that you can run pretty darn good adventures within the city. I have the overworld maps. These were done by Darlene, who is a fairly popular mapper, campaign artist. They got her to do the overland maps, which is cool. And I got the Undercity maps that show the sewer lines and things so that you can move around unseen. And we have the city maps for people who want the above ground view to see what all's there. This one came from one of the Dragon magazines, I believe. Another very good map. And the Greyhawk Gazetteer that came out for 3rd edition. Again, kind of a where is Greyhawk now? Which was pretty useful back then. Still useful today if you're running things in Greyhawk. All those things combined, and if anybody has a question of anything that's going on in Greyhawk, I can pretty much answer that. Along with that, I've got the Temple of Elemental Evil Adventure, the original one from back in the day. Well, this included the Village of Hamlet and T2, the Temple of Elemental set, combined into one softcover adventure. Still one of the more expansive and legendary adventures, so much so that when Princes of the Apocalypse came out, it was pretty clear what they were doing. I have a stack of these character sheets. They were made by an artist, and I unfortunately can't remember the artist at this time, but I collected some of all of the different character sheets, and these are fantastic. But these were completely useless in 3rd edition and 4th edition because characters changed so much. Now that we're in 5th edition, these sheets actually work pretty well again. So I'm going to have to scan and print those out whenever I want them. They're all in excellent shape. They were all kept in manila folders. I just rediscovered them not that long ago. And I have my overland map of the city of Greyhawk. One of the things that was great about Greyhawk is by making it such a real place, it was a real thrill as a player to have a character that first owned a building somewhere on that map. I could point to a place in that map and say, my character owns that building. At least in my world he does. And that's really cool. There's no other city that I had that much personality with that I would care for something like that. But it really did for Greyhawk. And then I have all these living Greyhawk journals, which were fun back in the day. where the RPGA had adventures that you could decide the fate of how the world of Greyhawk or Orth prospered by the deeds of your adventures, which was pretty cool. I always have clipboards lying around because I find clipboards to be very useful for gaming. Sometimes you don't always have the table space, and sometimes you just want to gather all your things up into one place and walk around and work on it. The other thing that I have is the Redhurst Academy of Magic source book. This was a student handbook. The concept is this is a magical school, kind of like Hogwarts, but set to 3rd edition D&D. It was set up as a D20 source from Human Head Publishing. And in my mind, it's one of the best. So you want to be a first level wizard learning your craft, do you? Well, here's a school, a whole set of strange circumstances and overriding storylines threaded through it. Excellent. One of these days I will get to doing a proper review, and I'm hoping one day I'll actually be able to run that an adventure using that. The only thing that I'd actually done is kind of borrowed it in a GURPS campaign that unfortunately died too early. Mostly my fault, though, so it's unfortunate, but it happened. D&D character sheets. These are free downloads on the internet, so the days of printed character sheets are kind of a dead thing, and a lot of people use digital these days, but I still have some for almost all the editions. The EverQuest role-playing game, I bought this to plunder it of useful ideas and things for 3rd edition. This is a Swords and Sorcery book. So it was a third party by SSS. And of course this was done in partnership with Sony. EverQuest was a fine world. I played the original MMO a lot. Not saying that I was the most powerful or anything of that sort, but I did enjoy it quite a bit. And this did not give you the feel of being in it. You could really only get that feel by being in a massive game with lots of other people. It's where I really got my first taste of enjoying role-playing in an MMO. I know not a lot of people do it, but you really stand out if you're the person who will talk in character and say things as your character would say them. To the point where I would actually have people invite me into their groups, and sometimes they just give me things because I was somebody who actually gave them a role-playing experience in the middle of a role-playing game. Fancy that. So yeah, I do have that, although I've never run an EverQuest game. Not enough people really know or care about that world to really make me want to do it. So, also, another D20 book by Green Ronin, Shadowspawn's Guide to Sanctuary. Sanctuary was from Thieves' World, the collection of short stories as edited and brought together by the late, great Robert Aspirin. And this was a wonderful source book for the city of Sanctuary, which is one of the most wretched fantasy worlds in existence. But they had their own magic system, and they had such deep and compelling characters because it wasn't big wizards all over the place. Wizards usually had their own share of troubles in this world. And as a result, I fell in love with the world. Even as mean and as kind of nasty as the world was, it had a heart to it from all these talented writers who contributed. And every story had a different flavor and a different angle. It was really good. And that is a very good source book encapsulating a number of the characters within and detailing all the different struggles that city had, and it had a lot. This is a playing screen for, is this 4th edition? It looks like 4th edition. DM screen, kind of a neat overall look. I never used it, I don't believe. Or if I did, I used it very little. Doesn't have a great impact to me. This, Arcana Unearthed, again, Swords and Sorcery. This was Monty Cook's little bit of contribution. There were some crazy ideas in here. Not a lot that I really appreciated for, things like balance, but it was a refresher on how much you could do in 3rd edition. All the different crazy angles you could go with, and one moment my cat is marooned up on the workbench. I'll go get her. Come here, you. Oh boy. Okay. So while Arcana Unearthed had some neat ideas in it, and Monty's always good for a couple of, off-the-wall ideas on how you can develop a rule set and different wrinkles that you can throw in. It's something that I never really used. I just used it for reading material more than anything, and I never really pulled a lot out of it. Which is a pity, but I got so burned out on 3rd edition, quite honestly. I think I need to go back into it and see what I can purloin out of it for 5th edition. And I'm sure there's some good stuff in there I could do. I also have... I never realized how much Swords and Sorcery stuff I've collected. I have the Creature Collection for Swords and Sorcery, a core rulebook, so it's basically their monster manual. Another thing that I never really used a great deal out of because this book reads kind of like the Fiend Folio or the Monster Manual 3 or 4 for 3rd edition D&D. There's a lot of interesting things, but really kind of exotic and out there critters that you can, of course, throw into your game to throw a new wrinkle at your group or something they haven't seen before, which, quite honestly, if you have players who've been doing it for a while, they can get kind of jaded. They think they've seen everything, and, well, oftentimes they really haven't. Anytime you get a book like that and can bring some new monsters into your game, you can really shake down some new things. And again, something I can convert to 5th edition without too much difficulty. Spycraft. This is by AEG. It's a D20 system espionage role-playing game by its cover. I have read the book, and I'm burned out on 3rd edition and D20 in general. This was a game that had some interesting ideas and really reinforces what the hit point system does for a game. It lets you do great, heroic, crazy actions, but its realism leaves a lot to be desired. After reading the book, I'm pretty sure that if I wanted to do anything espionage, I'd be sticking with my GURPS materials. I have an espionage for GURPS and a number of source books. I like the realism better for that. Kind of keeps the tension up for your players, too. And I also have AEG's Toolbox. This was actually, I believe, given to me as a gift by one of my players. This has an immense number of random tables and charts and things that you can use to kickstart your game and give you some ideas. This is almost completely unused because I never lack for ideas. It's not something for me. Clearly there are people who can get a lot out of this book. As I said, a number of NPCs and inns and city details, and there's just a ton of stuff in here. For what it is, it's a great value if you're ever going to use it, but I don't see myself ever really using it because I never have problems coming up with that stuff on the fly. So, it's weird, some of these things that I have, but not all of them are... Some of them were half-considered ideas that when they became available at a great price, I couldn't say no. Sometimes they were things like that I got gifted. So, not sad that I have them. I just don't know that I'll ever really use them. Although I might end up going back and, like I said, cribbing some of the ideas or maybe cribbing some of the tales out of there or maybe a few charts for something that I really want to do. One of the friends that I've made in my Facebook groups, Lee, also known as Juice, he had this great idea for coming up with a DM's binder, but his idea was to fill it full of tables and charts and things, which I don't use, so I don't have a need for that. But something like that is perfect for a person who runs their game in such a fashion. And then we come to the D&D books, and I'm just going to go over these really quickly. I also have a lot of these spell pack cards. I think these are a fantastic resource for spellcasters. If you can have the spell details all on a card in front of you when you're in a fight and you're looking through a hand of cards like you're playing Magic the Gathering or something, it's so much easier than having to have your book and constantly flipping it over and figuring out what you really want to cast at a given moment. It's so much easier if you have them on these little cards. So I've gotten most of the packs of these cards, which I understand is quite a lot. Got kind of expensive, and at least 2 of my sets are currently being used by players in my games. I really think I have gotten these for my players more so than I've ever gotten them for myself. And what makes it doubly ridiculous is that I'm playing a non-spellcaster in the game that I've got. But I've got the pack for Bards. I've got the Xanathar's Guide cards, which includes most of the ones from the Elements. The Paladin spells. My son's playing a Paladin, so he appreciates that. The Ranger pack. After starting to go through the Ranger spells for my podcast and Honest Wizard, I'm really starting to think about playing a Ranger. I'm reconsidering how effective they are as far as overall package of fighting and spellcasting. May have to check them out again. Elementals, that was from the Princes of the Apocalypse storyline, so yes, I had to get those. I also have one for the Monk Traditions, as my wife is playing a monk in my game. So that is to help them all out. Tangentially, it could help me out sometime, too, as it certainly would be useful to have those cards prepped and ready when I'm running something. But since all my players have half of my most useful cards, the Cleric and Arcane set, I do what I can. I do have to get the Druid set. I was thinking about playing a Druid, too. Also on my top shelf, we have the... This is probably the most ridiculous thing I've got. The Dark Sun mini boxed set. It is faithful to the Dark Sun set. It has all the little charts, but some of them are on these cute little flip charts. But charts and tables and all the booklets just in miniature form. At the time it made sense, but I used to have perfect eyesight. Now my eyesight isn't so perfect, and this is nearly useless. I do have a magnifying glass, and I do have reading glasses, but it's a slog. Especially so since I have the full-size box set, so I don't know why I have this. It was just a thing that I could get at the time, and I did. So, all right, so on my actual shelf, I know this is in danger of going a little too long, but we'll go over these a little bit quicker. From original Dungeons & Dragons, I don't have any of the original books. I've been looking for them, hoping to find them at a reasonable price. I would love the white box set. Let's be honest, I'd love the brown box set too, which was the very first printing of Dungeons & Dragons, but those sets sell for anywhere from the top-end hundreds to thousands of dollars. I have been to a couple of auctions where one or two of them were up for sale, and they went for vastly more than I could have ever really imagined spending, and I love my wife too much to just say, you know what, dear, I don't care anymore, to have gotten those, so no. Value my marriage far too much. But she would have put a brave face on it, but no, that's stupid. So I have my Advanced Dungeons & Dragons book, a very well-loved player's handbook, DM's guide. The Monster Manual is actually the first thing that I ever got. I saw it for sale at a Ben Franklin, or a Scratch and Dent store, I can't remember which. But if I can show it to you. It has pretty much fallen to pieces. That's just how some of these older books got to. I used to read through these quite often before I had the other books. And I got it for a song because the spine was a little bit damaged and now it's completely fallen apart. But I love the art. The old school D&D art was really cool, even before I had the rules to play the game, and involving the characters from here. So that was a thing. Then I went along and I rebought all three books again to have nicer copies. Some of it was for podcasting and making videos, but those are the nicer quality ones. And as you can see, despite the fact they're a little worn, they're in pretty good shape. Now, will I ever play Advanced Dungeons & Dragons again? Will I ever run an Advanced Dungeons & Dragons game? I'd like to. Sometimes I think that I'd like to show some of these younger players what gaming used to be like. I don't know. One of these days I'll have to try, but yeah. To wit, I've got all these books to supplement that. The Fiend Folio, which was like the Monster Manual 2. This one had a lot of crazy monsters in it. I believe the Wolf in Sheep's Clothing was in this one, and the Slod were in it. The Githyanki and the Githzerai were in this one. So some that really made an impact on the D&D universe, but you also had some very strange ones that don't pop up again, and that's fine. So, it's still good for reading, even to this day. I have copies of Deities and Demigods. No, not that copy. I wish. With the Deities and Demigods books, they've got two types. You've got the ones from the earliest printings where they had actually gotten the rights to be able to use the Cthulhu mythos from Lovecraft and so on, and also the characters from Michael Moorcock's franchises with Ariok, Lord of the Darks, and things like that. And Elric and Stormbringer and some of his... Yeah. Those rights went away, and they ended up having to reprint it without all that stuff. Still an excellent book if you want information and lore on a lot of the religions that we consider the mythologies of today. One of the biggest sins about this book, though, is it unfortunately gave some players a shopping list so that they wanted to go and hunt down the various deities to get their stuff, because, you know, you had some top-level stuff from the gods' artifacts and things in this book. So you would often hear about people who have killed Odin and taken his spear, and killed Thor and taken his hammer, and yeah. So, but still excellent books in their own right. And then I have all the Orange Spine books I think that I've ever seen and really wanted. We have the Monster Manual 2. Again, fun critters in this one. Everything was all about expanding out the number of monsters that you had. I have 2 copies of Greyhawk Adventures. One is for players, for the time that I've run in Greyhawk, to reference certain unique things from their book, and the other one is from me, of course. Unearthed Arcana. I, again, have 2 copies of that. I don't remember why I got... Oh, because I bought a collection, and Unearthed Arcana was in the second one. Both in pretty good shape. I have a Oriental Adventures, which was probably in my earlier days one of the biggest expansive books, including new rules and classes and gear and things. It was an excellent book. Made everybody want to play samurais and ninjas, which was cool. Back in the day, samurais and ninjas were cool. The Manual of the Planes. I love extraplanar travel and adventures. Sadly, that's usually the stuff that happens at the end of a campaign where you can do all that stuff. Planescape, in my mind, was one of the more revolutionary settings because it started you in that area, and I loved it. Have I ever played in any of those games? Not really. It mostly falls on me running them, but someday maybe. The Dungeoneer's Survival Guide. That's a great DM's reference, reminding you of all the different things that you can throw at parties, as well as giving parties the tips and tricks they need to survive in dungeons. It almost should be required rating, but a lot of the more narrative games these days, a lot of those dangers don't really exist anymore, as seen as contrary to the narrative or not fair. Yeah, it's just a different time. The Wilderness Survival Guide, another book with excellent tips and tricks on how tough it can be to survive out of doors, and what adventurers can do to make the trips easier, less challenging. Dragonlance Adventures, in my mind, one of the seminal books, again, for a world that completely revamps several elements within fantasy to the service of the game itself. Then I've got my DM screens and my books from BECME, Basic Expert Companion. I do not have the Master Set. I thought I did, but I don't. I'm looking for a copy now. And none of them are in boxes anymore. The boxes tend to crumble pretty quickly. You can find them these days, but they're, you know, usually you're looking at about $40 to $100 depending on their quality. And I have the materials. I don't really need the box or anything else for vanity's sake. It would make for a nicer shelfie, but yeah, like I said, I don't really pursue the shelfie all that much. That's not really my thing. Those are just, by the way, the screens and the books. All the modules and everything I have separated. I have 3 copies of the Rules Cyclopedia. If I'm ever going to run a BECME game, I will have the Rules Cyclopedia, 1 for me, 2 for the players. I don't expect anybody else to go out and try to find those books. But those are probably the best example of taking a collection of rules, putting them together, and presenting all of them in a a very dense, packed, lore-packed book encompassing everything you need for the Dungeon Master, for the players, to go all the way on up to 36th level, and it doesn't really do much for the Immortals. There's a little blurb on there on what to do with Immortals, but I have the Immortals rules, so I don't really need those. And moving forward from that, I think we're going to call it here. This has already been a fairly long video before we start moving into 2nd edition D&D, which would be that stuff. And then, of course, 4th and 5th and moving on. But we'll cover that in another video. I hope that you've enjoyed this, and I hope that I've kind of brought forth the whys and wherefores of a lot of why I collect what I do and how I go about collecting items in a set, either if they're out of print or targeting things based on what need I had for them or how useful I felt that they would be in a given game. So, well, I hope you enjoyed this. If you do, let me know. Comments below. Like and subscribe, of course, if you yourself haven't done so already. I love all my subscribers, and I talk back to you if you comment to me, so please do. And I'll continue more with this tour through the vault with another video in the future. So thank you very much, and I'll see you the next time I decide to crawl in front of the internet and make one of these videos. Thank you, and farewell.